This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silenced them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 144, Case Update Special, number 11. Whenever possible, I like to provide updates on as many past cases I've covered as possible. In this episode, I will provide updates on the cases of Frankie Gonzales, Marion Jester-Montoya, Damian Sutton, Zaiden Javonovich, Jaxson Love, Tesslynn O'Cull, Moko Rangitoheriri, Kyon Jones, Giovanni Melton, and Emrik Osuna. This is Case Update Special number 11. I'd like to thank my newest patron, Shirley H. from Hamilton, Ontario. Thank you so much for your support. If anyone would like to make a pledge, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. With that, I'll get right into the updates. The first case I'll be updating today is that of 2-year-old Frankie Gonzales of Waco, Texas, whose story I told way back in episode 19. On June 1st, 2020, Frankie's mother, Laura Villalon-Sanchez, called police in Waco, reporting that her toddler son had disappeared while she and her 3 young children visited a local park. Police and various other agencies mobilized a massive search involving land, water, and air, but despite a statewide Amber Alert being issued, no sign of Frankie could be found. The next morning, Laura changed her story and led police to Frankie's body, which she had hidden in a dumpster located on the property of the nearby Park Lake Baptist Church. An autopsy found Frankie's death was caused by homicidal violence, including blunt force injuries and multiple other injuries in various stages of healing. Laura later confessed that she slammed the toddler's head against a wall and later found him unconscious, so she hid his body in a closet for a few days. After wrapping his body in 12 trash bags, she deposited Frankie in the dumpster and reported her son missing. After Frankie's body was discovered, more information came out about Laura's lengthy criminal record and her chronic history of drug addiction and involvement with CPS. 6 of her previous children had been removed from her custody in 2015. Frankie was born while Laura was in prison, and he and his older and younger sisters were placed into the custody of their father, Lorenzo Gonzales, who signed a legal agreement with CPS that he would never leave his children alone with Laura. However, misguidedly thinking Laura had her drug addiction under control, Lorenzo went to work on or about May 28, 2020, violating the CPS agreement by leaving Frankie and the girls in Laura's care. Both Laura and Lorenzo were held in the McLennan County Jail. Laura Jane Villalon-Sanchez, who was also being held on a parole violation from a previous burglary conviction, was charged with capital murder and injury to a child. Lorenzo Gonzales was charged with abandoning a child and injury to a child by omission. He was also held on an immigration detention order as he is not a U.S. citizen. Both Laura and Lorenzo surrendered their parental rights to Frankie's surviving sisters, the younger of whom, it turns out, is not even Lorenzo's biological daughter. Since I last updated Frankie's story, there have been a couple of major updates. On Monday, March 20th, 2023, 31-year-old Lorenzo Gonzales pleaded guilty to both of his charges in the 19th State District Court. As a result of his plea, Judge Thomas C. West sentenced Lorenzo to 10 years in prison for each charge, with his sentences to run concurrently. When he finishes serving his sentence, officials say Lorenzo's immigration detainer will trigger a deportation hearing. By Texas law, he received credit for 1,006 days of time served in the McLennan County Jail. He must serve at least half of his sentence before he can apply for parole. Lorenzo is now serving his sentence in the Texas Department of Corrections in Tennessee Colony, Texas. After Lorenzo's plea hearing, McLennan County District Attorney Josh Teetons said, "We hope today's plea offers some closure to the family and our community for the tragic loss of Frankie Gonzales." Laura's trial was scheduled to begin on May 15th. At the time of Lorenzo's sentencing, Laura's attorney, Russell D. Hunt, Sr., told Waco news station 10 KWTX that they had worked out a tentative plea agreement with the DA's office, in which the state would waive the capital murder charge and the death penalty, allowing Laura to plead guilty to first-degree felony injury to a child in exchange for a 50-year prison sentence. We got confirmation of this plea agreement when, on Thursday, May 4, 2023, 38-year-old Laura Jane Villalon Sanchez pleaded guilty to injury to a child causing serious bodily injury or death and received a sentence of 50 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 25 years. Laura is still being held in the McLennan County Jail while she awaits transfer to state prison. In episode 13, I introduced you to a beautiful, chubby-cheeked 10-month-old girl from Lubbock, Texas, named Marion Jester-Montoya. Marion was a happy, sweet baby with plenty of dark hair and beautiful brown eyes. She brought endless joy into the lives of the family who loved her. On January 7, 2020, 27-year-old Trevor Rowe, the boyfriend of Marion's mother, Veronica Weems, took Marion to work with him after Veronica told him to take the baby and let her sleep. Instead of finding a babysitter, Trevor stuffed Marion into a backpack and left it on the floorboard of his car, returning at lunchtime to find that Marion had escaped the backpack. Instead of feeding the baby lunch or ensuring her comfort and safety, Trevor shoved her back into the bag, zipped it up, placed it in the trunk of his Dodge Charger, and went back to work as a roofer. When Trevor returned to his car after work, it was too late to save Marion, who was pronounced dead at the scene. Trevor was arrested early the next morning and charged with capital murder of a person under 10. Prior to Marion's death, her father, Emilio Montoya, and his family had made multiple reports to CPS, begging the agency to investigate their allegations of abuse and neglect against Veronica and Trevor, who was actually a friend of Emilio's at one point. Reportedly, Marion even tested positive for methamphetamine after being in her mother's care, but CPS still did nothing, and Marion ended up paying the price. Trevor has been held in the Lubbock County Jail on $2 million bail since his arrest. Rather than putting his life on the line and gambling with a capital murder trial in Texas, on April 28, 2023, Trevor Rowe accepted a plea agreement. By pleading guilty to capital murder with a victim under the age of 10, Trevor was sentenced on the spot to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emilio told KCBD 11 after the sentencing,
"He was crying as I was talking to him as well. We never broke eye contact. I will never truly just hate him because there were good times along with what's happened today. It is my job to forgive and God's to judge."
Still, Emilio said, he will always wonder why his formerly close friend killed his daughter.
That curiosity makes me want to say, as a friend, can't you just tell me what exactly happened that day?
Emilio and his family will now focus on keeping Marion's memory alive. Touching a necklace he wore, Emilio said,
I still hold on to her ashes right here, and I'll always keep her with me whenever any big events or anything comes up. I always remember her laughing and smiling.
I'm just so relieved for Emilio and his family. They won't have to endure the pain and trauma a trial would undoubtedly cause, and Marion's killer will spend the rest of his life behind bars where he belongs. Trevor will soon be transported to Huntsville to serve his life sentence. I can promise Emilio's family that I will always do whatever I can to help keep Marion's memory alive. I'll pause here for a quick word from my sponsors. In episodes 52 and 53, I told you the story of 2-year-old Damian Sutton, who was an energetic little boy with a ready smile and big blue eyes who loved superheroes and rock music. In 2013, Damian's mom, Nikki, needed a place to live. Nikki's mother, Tara Thompson, worked for a man named Ronald DeMombro Jr., who offered the 22-year-old single mother and her 2-year-old son a place to stay with him and his parents in their large, lavish home in Washington Township, Michigan. The only caveat was that Nikki would have to pretend to be Ron's girlfriend so his parents wouldn't question why she and Damian were staying with them. On August 21, 2013, Damian was rushed to the hospital with severe head trauma. As the little boy clung to life, police interviewed Ron, who was babysitting Damian when he was injured while Nikki was at work. Ron told numerous stories, but authorities believed he caused Damian's injuries by violently shaking the toddler, which Ron confessed to police. He was initially charged with first-degree child abuse. Damian remained on life support for several days, during which part of his skull was removed to reduce the pressure on his brain. On August 27th, he was taken off life support, and at 7:41 a.m., Damian died in his mommy's arms. After Damian died, Ron was also charged with first-degree murder. At trial in June of 2014, after less than an hour of jury deliberation, Ron was found guilty of both charges. However, Ron appealed his conviction on the grounds of a Brady violation, stating that the prosecution did not turn over 32 autopsy photos to the defense before trial. For this reason, Ron was granted a new trial, which began in January of 2020. After the second trial, during which Ron himself testified, the jury deliberated for about 8 hours over the course of 2 days before once again returning with a guilty verdict on both counts. Ron was ultimately sentenced to life in prison plus 15 to 25 additional years. He immediately appealed his second conviction. I last updated Damian's story on the podcast in December of 2021. In October of 2022, the Michigan Court of Appeals ruled on Ron's appeal. He had argued in his motion that the testimony of a prosecution expert exceeded the scope of his expertise, that the trial court erred by denying Ron's motion to remedy a supposed discovery violation, and that his defense attorney, Shannon Smith, was ineffective because she neglected to object to a particular jury instruction. In a 3-0 decision, the state appeals court affirmed Ron's second conviction on both charges, saying that all of Ron's claims lacked merit. Ron is serving his life sentence at Chippewa Correctional Facility on Michigan's Upper Peninsula. In June of 2021, I featured the story of 2-year-old Zaiden Javonovich in episode 64. On April 11, 2019, police responded to a mobile home in Wichita, Kansas after a 911 call about a domestic disturbance between 22-year-old Brandy Marchant and 26-year-old Patrick Javonovich. Upon speaking with the subjects, police learned there were 2 children inside the trailer and performed a welfare check. In a bedroom, an officer heard a baby cooing and discovered 4-month-old Ty under a pillow in his crib, surrounded by bedding and stuffed animals, weighing only 8 pounds instead of the 15.4 pounds an infant his age should weigh. Ty suffered from bruises, swelling, healing fractures, a genital infection, and a severe diaper rash. In a playpen, a second officer located 2-year-old Zaiden, face down in vomit, swaddled tightly in a blanket, wearing footy pajamas with his arms pinned against his body inside the garment. The loose sleeves were knotted around his throat. Despite attempts to revive Zaiden, he was pronounced dead at the scene just a month after celebrating his 2nd birthday. Brandy claimed she and Zaiden hadn't felt well for several days, so she put him in his crib on Wednesday evening so she could rest. Because he could pull himself out of his crib and cry at his bedroom door, she said, she put his arms inside his pajamas, tied them, and swaddled him in a blanket so he couldn't climb out of his crib. She went to bed at 6 a.m. and slept through till Thursday evening, at which time her argument with Patrick started. Brandy said she was not aware Zaiden was dead. An autopsy determined Zaiden died from dehydration and malnutrition, and he had also suffered from blunt force trauma to his face and head. Methamphetamine was also found in his system. Brandy and Patrick were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of child abuse, and 1 count of aggravated child endangerment in Zaiden's death and Ty's abuse. The pair had a history of domestic abuse and CPS involvement, and Brandy had a history of mental illness. In June of 2019, Patrick was attacked by a fellow inmate at the Sedgwick County Jail and underwent brain surgery from his injuries. He was deemed incompetent to stand trial until a mental evaluation in January of 2021 found him competent. Ty was permanently placed in the custody of his biological father, Julius, who is the doting father of several other children. It's a relief to know Ty will grow up in a supportive family, surrounded by all the love he deserves. In my podcast episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Julius and even hearing from little Ty himself for a few seconds. I last updated Zaiden's case in December of 2021. At long last, in July of 2022, Zaiden's case came to a resolution, although it was a disappointing one. Both Brandy and Patrick accepted plea agreements, pleading guilty to reduced charges of 1 count each of second-degree reckless murder, aggravated kidnapping, and child abuse. In September of that year, 26-year-old Brandy Kai Marchant and 31-year-old Patrick Ryan Javonovich were sentenced to serve 26 years and 10 months in prison, with credit for the 3.5 years they had already served in the Sedgwick County Jail. During the sentencing hearing, Brandy's attorney, Casey Cotton, told Sedgwick County District Judge David Kaufman that her client made a terrible mistake by neglecting her children, but she did not intentionally kill Zaiden. Saying Brandy had been young, sick, tired, and neglectful but not physically abusive, the attorney told the judge, "She's going to have to live with this going forward." Both Patrick and Brandy declined to speak at the hearing. Patrick is serving his sentence at the Ellsworth Correctional Facility. Brandy is incarcerated in the State Correctional Facility in Topeka, Kansas. The earliest possible release date for both is listed as February 3, 2042. In February of 2022, I dedicated episodes 98 and 99 to 2-year-old Jaxson Love. Jax was a happy, smiley little boy who loved superheroes, especially Batman, his big sisters, pizza, cheesecake, bananas, singing, dancing, Mickey Mouse, and most of all, his mommy. Jaxson was born to Brittany Gonzales and Willard K.J. Maynard, who, unbeknownst to Brittany, was married. After Jaxson was born, a DNA test proved Jaxson was Willard's biological son. A custody battle ensued, resulting in 50-50 custody between Brittany and Willard, despite multiple reports to CPS of injuries Jaxson incurred while in the care of his father and stepmother, Chelsea Maynard. On July 25, 2017, Jaxson was in Willard and Chelsea's care when he was rushed to the emergency room. The couple told medical staff that Jaxson was injured by falling off a trampoline. When interviewed, Chelsea eventually told police she was angry over her husband's infidelity when she threw Jaxson into the air and let him fall to the ground. 30-year-old Chelsea Maynard was arrested. Jaxson was pronounced dead on July 28, 2017. His heart and liver were donated to 2 little boys from Southern California, cementing the tiny Batman fan as a real-life superhero. The results from Jackson's autopsy, which took several months to be released, showed that Jackson's death was a homicide caused by blunt force injury to the head, with a contributing factor of blunt force injury to the torso. On January 31, 2022, Chelsea accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and 5 child abuse enhancement charges. My episodes came out the following week prior to Chelsea's sentencing, which took place on March 21, 2022. Although cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, family members read victim impact statements while Chelsea looked straight ahead, not showing much emotion. Chelsea was sentenced to 26 years in prison, which she is currently serving in the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Her earliest parole eligibility date is in December of 2035. Outside the courtroom, Brittany told Fox 40 that she was glad the court process was over, but 26 years wasn't long enough to make up for the lifetime Chelsea stole from Jaxson.
That she took such a beautiful boy from his family that loved him so much, and her actions will never be forgiven. I know it's in the Bible to forgive, but I can't forgive what she did to my son. He was only 2. It's just, we lost all the hopes and the dreams that he would have been. I won't be able to take him to his first A's game. I won't take him to his first Raider game. I won't see him get married, go to college. I won't see him do any of that.
Honestly, I can't blame Brittany for being unable to forgive that awful woman either. Grief is such an individual thing, and everyone has to process it differently. When it comes to losing a child, I can only imagine how much more complicated that process becomes. At the time of the sentencing, Brittany was pregnant with another little boy who was born the following month. The baby just celebrated his first birthday last month. He just started walking, and he's very nearly a spitting image of Jax. Sadly, in October of 2022, Brittany unexpectedly lost her dad, Ernie Love, who she was very close with. The one thing that comforted her was that she knows her Jaxie has been reunited with his papa, who he adored. On a brighter note, to honor Jackson's 8th birthday in February, Brittany did an absolutely amazing thing that took my breath away and that I just have to share with all of you. She went to the local grocery store and asked if there were any children's birthday cakes that hadn't been paid for yet, and when they found one, Brittany paid for the cake and left a card for the family that read, "Happiest of birthdays to your child. Your cake has already been paid for. My son passed away in 2017, and his birthday is February 27th. He would have been 8 this year. So in his honor, we bought this cake for your child. I hope your day is filled with lots of love, happiness, and of course, cake. From Jackson's mom and Jaxson." This is such a beautiful, meaningful, thoughtful way to honor a child's birthday. I love it so much. It's so much more impactful and so much less damaging to the environment than a balloon release. Finally, last month, in honor of Donor Remembrance Day on April 30th, Brittany spoke with KPIX about her decision to donate Jackson's organs.
That's, something to be able to hear your son's heartbeat again. It's bittersweet, but I reached out to the families via letter and let them know that I am happy I made that decision, and I'm hoping that their little boys are living life to the fullest and thriving.
I wish Brittany and her kids nothing but health and happiness going forward. She is honestly one of the sweetest people I've had the opportunity to talk to over the years, and she deserves the best. Now I'll take another quick sponsor break. In April of last year, I released episodes 108 and 109 about the story of 3-year-old Tesslynn O'Cull, who should be turning 29 next month. Tesslynn loved animals, music, her bath toys, and most of all, insects. Every time she found a bug, she had to show it to everyone in the house. In early 1997, Tesslynn and her mother, 21-year-old Stella Kaiser, moved into an apartment in Springfield, Oregon, with Stella's new boyfriend, 20-year-old Jesse Compton. Immediately, the young couple's priorities were clear: drugs. Caring for Tesslynn fell by the wayside. Jesse always seemed angry with the little girl, calling her despicable names and abusing her in full view of their frequent drug-addled party guests. He was seen slapping Tesslynn in the face, dragging her by the hair, and forcing her to take cold baths or showers. Weeks before Tesslynn's death, Jesse broke 4 vertebrae in her back. He inflicted violent sexual abuse on the toddler. He began inflicting cigarette burns to her legs, and he used a small propane torch to inflict horrific burns on her back, buttocks, and genitals. He and Stella treated the infected burns by pouring large amounts of rubbing alcohol into them. Jesse eventually began tying Tesslynn up, leaving her restrained for up to 10 hours at a time. On the last day of her life, Jesse hit Tesslynn multiple times in the head, punched or stomped her abdomen, and punctured her skin with a fork. On June 13, 1997, Jesse and Stella left Tesslynn tied up in the bedroom. When they returned after midnight, Tesslynn had already died of shock. They attempted to revive her by performing CPR, splashing her with cold water, and shocking her with the frayed end of an electrical cord. Finally, they buried Tesslynn's body in a shallow grave and went about their lives, acting like unencumbered newlyweds. Stella's first trial ended with a deadlocked jury leading to a mistrial, but after a second trial, she was convicted on multiple counts. She was sentenced to life in prison, which she is currently serving in the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville. Jesse was ultimately convicted on multiple charges for Tesslynn's murder, torture, and rape, and the callous disposal of her body. He was sentenced to death, and he currently remains incarcerated in the Two Rivers Correctional Institution in Umatilla, Oregon. I didn't expect to have an update on this case, but in December of 2022, as one of the clemency decisions she made toward the end of her term, Oregon's then-Governor Kate Brown announced that she would commute the sentences of Oregon's 17 death row inmates to life in prison without parole. I have long believed that justice is not advanced by taking a life, and the state should not be in the business of executing people, even if a terrible crime placed them in prison. This is a value that many Oregonians share. Unlike previous commutations I've granted to individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary growth and rehabilitation, this commutation is not based on any rehabilitative efforts by the individuals on death row. Instead, it reflects the recognition that the death penalty is immoral. It is an irreversible punishment that does not allow for correction, is wasteful of taxpayer dollars, does not make communities safer, and cannot be and never has been administered fairly and equitably. Although it is one of only 27 states that allows the death penalty, Oregon had a moratorium on executions since 2011, and current Governor Tina Kotek feels the same way about capital punishment as the previous governor did. I haven't made it any secret in the past that I'm very much against the death penalty, which has earned me some criticism among people who believe in an eye for an eye. I'll quote the Oregon Justice Research Center's executive director Bobin Singh, who said that capital punishment risks executing innocent people, and Oregon is not immune to the cases of wrongful conviction seen around the country. Research has demonstrated that the death penalty is tremendously wasteful of resources, does not keep our communities safer, and provides the fiction of closure as death penalty cases drag families through the courts for decades. In my eyes, even one innocent person executed is too many. You're never going to change my mind on that. Better these guilty people who committed atrocious crimes should rot in prison for the rest of their pathetic lives than a single wrongfully convicted person be put to death. That's just my opinion, of course, but hey, this is my podcast, right? Anyway, executing Jesse Compton would not and could not bring little Tesslynn back. May the rest of his life behind bars be horrific, uncomfortable, and miserable, and may Tesslynn continue to rest in peace. In episodes 111 and 112, I told you the story of 3-year-old Moko Rangitoheriri. Moko was an energetic, fearless little boy with a bigger-than-life attitude who brought joy into his family's lives. In mid-2015, Moko's single mother, Nicola Dalipaki, was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Her older son was hospitalized in Auckland, New Zealand, with a severe blood and bone infection from a prior broken leg, but she had no family nearby who could care for her 2 younger children while she stayed in the hospital with him. Desperate, Nicola asked her friend, Tanya Shaler, who she worked with years before at a Kahanga Reo, or Maori preschool, if the kids could stay at her home in Taupo. Tanya agreed to take in 3-year-old Moko and his 7-year-old sister, not telling Nicola that her boyfriend, David Hariwa, was living with her after being freshly released from prison. During the 2 months Nicola's children lived with Tanya and David, the couple took to punishing Moko by punching, kicking, slapping, throwing, and even biting the little boy. Moko was often placed in timeout, which meant being locked in the bathroom for hours or even days at a time. On August 5, 2014, the abuse escalated to the point of no return. Tanya attacked Moko, stomping repeatedly and forcefully on his abdomen. One of the adults inflicted a severe head injury on the little boy, who was covered in bruises, vomiting, and defecating spontaneously. By August 9th, Moko was so bruised, scabbed, and swollen he could barely open his eyes. He could hardly walk. Even so, the abuse continued. David rubbed feces in Moko's face and gave him a shower, scrubbing so hard Moko's scabs came off. David covered his mouth to muffle his screams. By the time the couple sought medical attention for Moko on the afternoon of August 10th, it was too late. Moko died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital. Tanya Shaler and David Hariwa were charged with Moko's murder. The following year, the two were permitted to plead guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter, which enraged and disgusted the public and Moko's family alike. On the day of their sentencing, thousands marched outside various courthouses in New Zealand to protest the Crown's decision to reduce the charges. Tanya and David were each sentenced to 17 years in prison, of which they would be forced to serve a minimum of 9 years. A few months after my initial episodes about Moko, I had the privilege of speaking with his mom, Nicola, in episode 120. Just recently, I got a notification about a small update to Moko's story. His father, Jordan, recently spoke with RE News in New Zealand, which they published in a piece titled, "I wanted to hurt the people who killed my son, but violence won't help."
There's no other way to say it. I wanted to kill them. I was going to kill them. Moko, he was beautiful, cheeky, and mischief, and the joy of the room. I remember the day before I got out, I rung their mum, and I got to talk to them. And I said to my daughter, "Love you, my baby." And she said, "Love you, Dad." And I said to Moko, "Love you, son." And he said, "Yep." And I said, "Love you, son." And he said, "Yep." I said, Don't you love Dad?" And he said, "No, bye, Dad." And then he left, and that was the last words that he ever spoke to me and I ever spoke to him. He just wanted to go play, and yeah. Yard 117, Waikeria prison, the day before I got out. And then I got out, went on home detention. The next time I seen him was Starship. And I had to identify his body.
Jordan, who spent 15 years in the Black Power gang, talked about growing up underprivileged without a dad.
I think if I had a father to teach me how to be a father, then I could have been a better father for him. I could have been a better father for all my kids. It breaks me every day. Growing up, I remember not having enough food all the time. You know, single mum on the benefit with 5 kids. I think that was pretty hard for her. And that's what pushed me towards the gangs, I suppose. I just wanted more for us, wanted better things for us, so I figured out I can go to people's houses and jump the fence and steal new white socks off their lines and shoes off their doorsteps.
He also talked about his face tattoo and his time in the gang.
I always wanted power, so I used violence to take it. So this means mangukaha. It's black power in Māori. So I created this and put it on my face because I wanted everyone to know who I was and to intimidate them pretty much. It wasn't until I really lost my son that I sort of realised that I needed to change and I wanted to change, but I didn't know how to change.
Jordan also discussed how the organization called She Is Not Your Rehab helped him take responsibility for his own healing.
I used to have nightmares all night of chasing these people and trying to kill them and shooting them, and they just wouldn't die. So She Is Not Your Rehab pretty much helped save that, I think. If I didn't meet Matt and Sarah, then I could be still thinking those thoughts. They got us to partner up, and we had to look each other in the eyes. They said that you had to connect hearts, so I walked up to the male that was in front of me, and I just had overwhelming anxiety. The first thought that came to my head was smash him in the face before he smashes you in the face. And I feel like that's just how we were raised. And then I had to get rid of that thought, breathe, look him in his eye, let all that awkwardness and emotions go, and then give him the nod, and then the turbo, and then give him a hug, which was the most out of it feeling I've ever felt in my life. Like, it was crazy. And then I had to do it another 10 or 20 times with other men, and they were screaming out all those hugs your fathers never gave you, hug your partner harder. And I looked around, and there was massive fully grown men, you know, of all walks, gangs, crying. And it made me cry. And my partner was on my shoulder and he was crying too. That was awkward, but it was also life-changing. It was the first time that I sat in a room full of men and we cried and we were trying to make it normal. Well, for me, anxiety, panic attacks, awkwardness, being uncomfortable. The only way I could deal with it was violence. I don't use violence anymore. Don't get me wrong, I get frustrated sometimes, and pissed off, but I've got tools in my toolbox now that I can use, and it's okay to talk, it's okay to cry, it's okay to open up, be vulnerable, be proud to know that you can cry, and accept the hugs. That was one of the hardest for me. Tell your bros that you love them. Tell other men that you love them.
Hearing Jordan speak about learning how not to use violence to solve his issues or deal with his emotions is really powerful and uplifting, and I wanted to share that with all of you. In May of 2022, I featured the tragic story of Kyon Jones in episode 113. 2-month-old Kyon was last seen on May 5, 2021. His mother, LaDonia Boggs, reported him missing 2 days later, but despite intensive searching by police and volunteers, Kyon has never been found. During a Facebook Live interview, LaDonia first claimed she gave Kyon to another woman and then said that a social worker had removed him from the home. Finally, she made a drug-addled admission that Kyon died when she was on PCP and rolled over on the baby in her sleep. She said when she awoke, she panicked, threw the baby and his car seat into a dumpster, and gave his clothes to a neighbor. LaDonia was initially charged with evidence tampering and murder, but the murder charge was not pursued. While awaiting trial for evidence tampering, LaDonia was found dead in her apartment building on April 27, 2022, with multiple stab wounds. Kyon's father, Kyon Jones, was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Kyon told police that he went to LaDonia's apartment where they got into an argument about Kyon, during which he said he stabbed LaDonia in the abdomen. In September of 2022, a few months after I told Kyon's story on the podcast, Kyon accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. In December, Kyon was sentenced to the maximum prison time allowed by the plea agreement, 9 years. Kyon did not speak at the hearing, but his attorney, Elizabeth Weller, said that if the case had gone to trial, she believed a jury would have found Kyon not guilty, but he wanted to take responsibility and agreed to take the plea. D.C. Superior Court Judge Milton C. Lee said to Kyon at sentencing that Kyon's death was the root cause of his actions, ordering him to attend psychological, drug, and grief counseling in prison. You both suffered a devastating loss of a child. Ms. Boggs was not a perfect person, but it sounds to me she was trying hard. And the answer to that is not rage or anger, but empathy. LaDonia's friends and family were unhappy with Kyon's prison sentence. One of her daughters, Diamond Boggs, said, "I don't think this is fair. I will never get to see my mother again. Drug dealers get more time than this." 45-year-old Carl Bernard Jones is currently serving his sentence in USP Hazleton, a high-security federal penitentiary located in Brewston Mills, West Virginia. His release date is listed as May 24, 2030. Time for one last sponsor break. In June of 2022, episodes 118 and 119 featured the story of 14-year-old Giovanni Melton. Giovanni was a bright, loving, kind, energetic teenager who loved joking around, bringing smiles to people's faces, and spending time with his boyfriend, Jesse. Supposedly frustrated with his teenage son's behavior, in 2017, Wendell Melton rented an apartment in Henderson, Nevada, and, unthinkably, allowed 14-year-old Giovanni to live there by himself. On November 2, 2017, a tearful Wendell called 911, telling the dispatcher that during a physical altercation with his son, his gun accidentally went off, striking Giovanni in the chest. Giovanni was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead at just 14 years old. After Giovanni's death, multiple people came forward with information indicating the killing was not an accident, but instead the deliberate action of a homophobic father who couldn't tolerate having a gay son. Prosecutors did not use that argument at trial, instead claiming that Wendell took the gun with him to confront Giovanni and intentionally shot him after finding out his son didn't go to school that day. On May 4, 2022, Wendell was found guilty of first-degree murder with a deadly weapon, child abuse, neglect, or endangerment with a deadly weapon resulting in substantial bodily harm, and child abuse, neglect, or endangerment. After my episodes about Giovanni came out in June, Wendell's sentencing was pushed back repeatedly throughout the rest of 2022, to the great frustration of Giovanni's mom, Veronica. Finally, the sentencing hearing took place on November 16, 2022, 5 full years after Giovanni died. Wendell was legally banned from owning guns due to a previous conviction for domestic battery. However, police found a fully stocked gun safe at Wendell's home during the investigation. At the sentencing hearing, Chief Deputy District Attorney Jacob Villani stressed that the presence of the gun that day was the cause of Giovanni's death. Without that firearm, even by the defense's own admission, everybody walks out of that room alive. Wendell was allowed to give a statement, saying he did not hate his son for being gay. Giovanni was my son, and I loved him very much. Veronica gave a victim impact statement at the hearing, saying, "This monster should be made an example of, and I ask that you send a message to Nevada that we don't go around shooting our children and get away with it." District Judge Michelle Levitt sentenced Wendell to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 28 years. She also ordered him to pay restitution of almost $16,500. He is currently serving his sentence in the High Desert State Prison in Indian Springs, Nevada. In episode 121, I told you the tragic story of 9-year-old Emrik Osuna. Emrik was a funny, loving child whose smile and personality could light up a room. He loved grilled cheese sandwiches, putting things together, Transformers, and ninjas. On September 2, 2020, 9-year-old Emrik was rushed to the hospital in Boise, Idaho, where medical staff tried for hours to revive the unresponsive child. Emrik was pronounced dead the same evening. According to police, Emrik, who showed signs of extreme abuse, was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and covered in bruises after suffering months of horrific torture. Emrik's stepmother, Monique Osuna, admitted to striking Emrik with various household items, including a belt, a dog leash, a back scratcher, a wooden spoon, and a frying pan, as well as kicking him in the groin. Ada County Prosecutor Tamara Kelly said Monique also admitted to locking him in a small closet to sleep, withholding food, and making him do physical strenuous punishments while she was working. For weeks prior to his death, Emrik was given nothing but water and rice for nourishment. Emrik's father and stepmother were both arrested the day Emrik died. Monique Osuna was charged with first-degree murder. Emrik's father, Eric Osuna, was initially charged with felony injury to a child, felony infliction of great bodily injury, and concealment of evidence, the last because he removed nanny cameras installed inside the couple's apartment and asked another individual to dispose of them. The cameras were later recovered. Later, Eric's charge of injury to a child was upgraded to murder. The videos proved that Eric watched his son's abuse and slowed death but did absolutely nothing to intervene. He also participated to some degree in the mental and physical abuse. In February of 2022, Monique pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. A month later, Eric pleaded guilty in exchange for the same. Monique was sentenced in June of 2022 to life in prison without parole. The judge also enforced a 100-year no-contact order for her surviving children. She is incarcerated in the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. Eric's sentencing hadn't taken place when I released my episode, in which I spoke with Emrik's maternal aunt, Irene Zepeda. Eric's sentencing hearing took place in October before Ada County District Judge Stephen Hippler. At the hearing, witnesses testified about Eric's abusive, chaotic childhood, lower than average intelligence, and executive function deficits. His attorney asked the judge to consider a sentence of 20 years in prison and 5 more on parole. Eric made a statement to the judge saying he had failed as a father and a caregiver for Emrik, and for the torture he allowed to happen to his son, he said he was willing to pay whatever price. Judge Hippler held him to that, calling what Emrik endured unspeakable, unforgettable, and evil. The judge emphasized that Emrik was abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love him and care for him. He then handed down Erik's sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emrik is serving his sentence in Unit 14 of the Idaho State Correctional Institution in Kuna, Idaho. Thank you for listening, everyone. It's very important to me to provide updates whenever I can on the cases I've covered. I never forget about these kids after I've told their stories. Each one of them has a piece of my heart, and I feel very strongly about following their stories and continuing to support their families in any way I can. My sources for this episode were the Waco Tribune-Herald, 10 KWTX, Fox 44 News, the McLennan County Jail website, the Texas Department of Corrections website, WSAZ News Channel 3, KCBD 11, the Macomb Daily, the Michigan Department of Corrections website, the Michigan Court of Appeals website, the Wichita Eagle, ABC KAKE, the Kansas Adult Supervised Population Electronic Repository, Fox 40, the California Department of Corrections website, Facebook, the Oregonian, the Oregon Government website, RE News, the Washington Post, the Federal Bureau of Prisons website, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the Nevada Department of Corrections website, the Idaho Press, and the Idaho Department of Corrections website. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.